All right. And you'll let them in? You did. Okay, good. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Jenks Center online evening and weekend programming. We're so pleased that you're here this evening. And we just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping, some information for you. So you can go and sign up for our e-newsletter happenings. We send one out every month that will alert you to all of our new programming, give you information on how to sign up for it. And be advised that our presentation this evening is being recorded. You may not wish to appear in it, so you could turn off your camera. We also ask that you participate in our online surveys if you do receive one in your email. They are a requirement for our grant. So I'd like to go over what we have happening in August. We have our Walking Winchester series. This is our programming with WinCam, which is the community access television. They are doing the farmers market this month. And then we have Composer's Corner with guest Bonnie McLeod. She has also a beautiful singing voice, so hopefully she'll not only play the piano, but maybe sing for us if we're lucky. And that's August 10th. I believe you can already sign up for these, so please go in and do that early. They will send you a reminder the day of and letting you know that you did sign up for it. Budget decorating tips and tricks with Stacy Martin. That's on August 14th. We have Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the World with Cheryl Faye. She is an actress. She does a one-woman show. She writes and produces it. That's August 17th. Stretching for daily maintenance, that's with John Saya. He's going to help us and show us what we should do every day to stay in shape and stay limber. Then we have Feng Shui Your Space with Mei Hong. She did come last year and she taught us a little bit, and she's coming back this year to dive in a little bit deeper with that information. So I want to thank the Cummings Foundation for this generous grant. We, over the last 3 years, participated in a grant from them to expand our evening and weekend programming. And now we've received a 10-year grant, and we just feel so blessed to have that and the ability to keep going. So that brings us to this evening, how to become a race car driver. And I'm not going to say your name, I'm going to say AT. And we also are having Andrew, my husband, is going to participate as the host as well. So I'm just going to read a little bit about AT, so you can have a little background information, but I'm sure you guys will dive in deeper. So of course, I just mentioned that my husband will be in on the interview. And AT heads up Hydrocision, a technology company in the field of medical devices. He has over 20 years of medical device experience spanning startups to Fortune 500 organizations. He has led organizations from commercial and general management perspectives and has significant global experience in the areas of product and market development. Prior to joining Hydrocision, AT held leadership roles at Smith Nephew and Medtronic. We will explore how he got into race cars, what it takes to participate, and some of the tips and techniques that he teaches to maintain control while pushing the limits of what is possible on the track. I emphasize track, not on the roads, husband.
Oh my God, what an ending, please. We haven't even started tonight.
Okay, just so we keep that in mind. Yeah. And now I will turn that over to you.
Thank you so much, hon. That's great. I got to tell you that my lovely wife started this job about a year ago, and they said, you know, we want 5 exciting things a month, and she's built 15 exciting things a month. And And then they said, well, we want something that's manly. So I had to find things that are manly. And there's nothing more manly than racing a Porsche GT3 SR, or whatever. We'll talk about whatever this model is tonight. I'm going to try saying her name, Alain, and I don't speak French, but I think it's Alain Tranchemontagne. Is that a good way? Am I saying anywhere close to it?
That's very good, actually.
But AT is the name that we call him for the rest of us that can't figure out how to say his name. But I met him at an executive networking group a couple of years ago, and was quite fascinated with his background and kept in touch with him. And only recently did I find out that he races Porsches. And I had told him that I was looking at releasing a Porsche Macan. He said, well, I have the one in the corner that you see there. That's the GT. So very excited to have you tonight. Before we get into a wonderful presentation that you built, and by the way, thank you very much for that. Tell us a little bit about how you even got into the world of science and medicine. And was there a seminal moment in your life when you were a kid where some event happened or something in your life happened that just you knew at that point that you were destined to be, in the world of science and medicine, and maybe even someday knowing you're going to be a CEO of a company?
Let me answer. It's an interesting question. I don't think I was that foresighted, but there was a time where I was in the industrial world early in my career. And this was right around the time where, we had one of those, economic debacle. And the thought came to me that, I had done some healthcare very, very early, and that's a much more stable environment. So sought cover. And so I ended up actually joining, that was when I joined Medtronic, actually. So that was the initial time, 2001 from memory. Before that, I'd done a little bit of everything. But later on, it did become obviously a lot more meaningful. At that time, it was more of a self-serving purpose. But eventually you start to learn when your parents get older and you start to deal with people who have aches and pains, then it starts to take a different meaning all its own.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the other side of it, on the engineering side, and it's great to wake up in the morning knowing that you're doing good things in the world. And I know specifically Hydrocision, I believe, is it true that this is a surgical process for the prostate? Is that what that is?
That's one of the technology applications. Yeah. So indeed, BPH technology that is being used right now for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, we won't get into painful discussions and medical stuff tonight. It's more a fun race car discussion. So, do you want to start your presentation at this point?
Sure. Let me do this.
Excellent.
There we go. All right. So the when Andrew and I connected, Andrew was saying, people would maybe be interested in figuring out how do you get into racing, and how did you get into racing? Interestingly enough, I didn't get into racing. My wife got me into racing, and that's her.
It's her fault.
But this is true to God's story. So back a number of years ago, I've owned Porsches for a very long time, but I ended up buying one of these, way too much car for myself, for my own health. And I think it scared her. And so what she did is she enrolled me in racing classes. So basically, how to race, how to control a car. And I remember it was Christmas, and she gave me the document, and she says, I hate giving you this, but I think you need it. And she was absolutely right. It was way too much car. And although I thought I was good, there was no way I could do, what could be done with that car safely. So, and to your wife's point, I probably would have done that on the street. And the good news is once you exert all this energy on the racetrack, you actually get back on the road and you just don't want to go fast. You just want to relax. So
really, huh?
Yeah, it's actually, and my wife 6 weeks ago spent her first 2 days on track being taught by one of my co-instructors. And it was funny because the same thing occurred to her. She loved it. She couldn't wait to get faster on the track. But once she got off the track, it was like, yeah, we'll just drive normally. So interestingly enough.
Tell us about, she's in all these different, before you move on, if you don't mind, is that your son there too, can I assume?
No, that's my actually godson. So my brother's son, he was visiting us, and this is at one of the ports in Rhode Island where they have submarines and all that stuff. So we
I
took.
was going to say in the background that almost looked like a jet maybe or something. Is it?
It's a helicopter, yes.
Helicopter.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
So.
Excellent. Thank you.
So you know, the question obviously was, would I recommend it? And I absolutely would recommend it to anyone who wants to have fun. Now, it's kind of obvious if you love cars, right? If you're a speed freak or anything else like this. But interesting enough, my wife couldn't care less about cars. And yet once she got on the track, she couldn't get enough of it. In fact, it's funny because the second day I was ready to go home and she wanted to stick around and talk to people and get to know more people and learn more about it. So there is something about it that goes well beyond, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but it's really about an investment in yourself. Now, because I got into it the way I got into it, meaning I was pushed into it, I didn't really do my analysis. And I'm going to strongly recommend you, if you're interested, do your research. I'll give you some tips, but do your own research because it is a time hog. It does take, 3 to 5 days, at least a month, if you're going to do that. Now, you could do it once and be done with it, but it can, if you get hooked, as they say, you can see the time consumption go up, way up. It does cost a bit of money. You can start fairly reasonably priced, but as you pick up speed, and we'll talk about that a little later, just understand you're going to wear tires and brakes and what have you, and God forbid, nick the car. The costs do add up, insurance, fuel, you name it. You obviously need a car, but most people don't realize you don't necessarily need a powerful car. You could do it with a small Honda, or actually you will see a small Honda a little later in this presentation. And then finally, you need your brain, because if you're not paying attention, if you're not focused, and that is one of the reasons why I like it so much. And again, we'll talk about it in a second, but you absolutely need 100% of your concentration. Otherwise, it's just too risky. But believe me, once you get there, there's no way you could not be concentrated. So what is racing effectively? It's actually two things. Most people think of racing as a big umbrella, but there's two components to it. On the one hand, there's what we call high performance driving. And for this, so if you're interested, there's a number of race schools out there. I started with a Porsche Experience racing school down in Birmingham, but then I evolved and I did a number of them. That teaches you the basic skills. I'm actually an instructor now for this, but this is how do you manage the car when you're turning and whoops, you lose control. How do you regain control? What is losing control effectively? It's all very simple. It's all mechanical. It's all mathematics and physics, but you do need to learn it. They will not allow you to race unless you can demonstrate you're proficient with performance driving. And then you can get into what's known as racecraft, which is, and these are the various organizations, there's many more, that host or facilitate the racing events. And there, what you do is more the competitive side. And again, I'll show you what that might entail. But what you're doing is you're applying your high performance driving skills into a competitive environment where you're now competing against other people. In the first format is just a bunch of people on the track trying to learn how to navigate a track safely and at speed. And the other one, you're just trying to beat the other guy. So here's an example of what happens when you're learning how to drive. So you'll be on the track, there'll be an instructor with you, at least at first, and they'll be walking you through everything you need to do, braking, turning. You see the guy pointing, he's just basically telling when to accelerate, when to slow down. Eventually you start to learn about that by yourself and you become proficient at it. Once you're good enough, then you get into officially racing. Just again, to reemphasize the fact that racing does not require necessarily supercars. You don't need to, these are little spec Miatas. This was actually one of my first race at a racetrack called Sebring down in Florida. Very, very well-known racetrack, one of the longest ones in the country, 3.7 miles. It's a lot of fun. It's very flat, so there's actually limited risk from that standpoint. What I'm going to do is show you a couple of small things that are part of the racecraft aspect. when is going to be positioning. So this is the very first lap. We're about to get the green flag, and you won't hear too much noise, so I can talk through it. And now we're actually off. And you can see the little Honda I mentioned earlier, we just passed it. So now we're forming. There's about 12 cars in front of me. There's 58 cars on the track. So there's another, bunch of them behind me. Now notice what I'm doing is I'm giving myself some space. There's about 50 feet between, whoops, that wasn't the, hold on, let me just move it back. I'm giving myself about 50 feet right behind these guys. Why? At the beginning of the race, every time you're racing, something bad happens. Why? Because you got 50 cars or 60 cars all bunched up very closely, and you want to be able to understand who is the crazy of them all. Where are the spots going to open? You don't want to be too far back so you can actually compete back up the food chain, so to speak, but you also want to get a lay of the land, so to speak. You'll notice also something on the right-hand Moses, there's a little green squiggle. That's actually the racetrack. The red dot, that's where my car is right now. And if you keep moving forward, so up, left, and then back down, you'll see that it's a long set of left-handers and then a right-hand curve. You'll notice one thing. If you're on the inside of a racetrack, and this is all racecraft here, you're going to have a shorter line, so which technically means faster. But if you look, the right-hander, that gentle sweeping, is followed by a very long straight line. That is where you're going to pick up the most speed. So in the left-handers at the top of this little squiggle, you're not going to go very fast. So it's easy to pick up somebody to gain speed. And once you get into the fast space, that's where you want to be positioned for maximum acceleration. Watch what happens. There's going to be a couple of things I will stop. So right now I'm just bunching up. Like I said, everybody's going slow, so it's easy for me to catch up. Now what we're going to see is we're all bunched up together. There's a guy on the left of me who could be passing me. And watch, whoops, that wasn't what the intent was. I apologize about that. I'm going to bring you back to where we were. Whoops, there we go. So now you saw right here, because of this pile of cars, there is an accident. If you're the guy right behind, and I'm going to pull it back and just allow you to see in motion, if you're the guy right behind, you just lost a lot of time, if not the race, because you just got bumped. I've now positioned my car on the right-hand side, which is the inside line for that long sweep. And the guy who was on my left, which was looking like he was going to pass me, is now a distant memory. So that's racecraft. Racecraft is positioning yourself on the track. You're not necessarily going as fast as you possibly could. What you're trying to do is understand who you're competing with, positioning yourself so that you don't get, they always say you first have to finish if you want to finish first. And that's what you're trying to do with racecraft. And then obviously go after the first position. So that's what racing is all about. It's those two different things. And you're trying to do is balance the car all the way through. So what I'm going to try to do is go through a set of questions I get regularly. The first question I get all the time is, so what do you drive? Well, this is my garage. It's a bunch of different cars. As you can see, I like black, so my cars are all black. These are street cars. I don't race them. What I do is I train with them. I do this high performance driving, so I train with them. I instruct with them. Some of them are installed with roll bars and data systems, so you can see the pictures I just showed you. They're all normal cars. I mean, the one on the right-hand side of the bottom of the screen, that's a very normal Audi S3, nothing fancy about it. It can go on the track. You can take anything on the track if you're not racing. Now, if you're going to go race, you do have to meet some class requirements. So the car on the top left, car on the top right, and the car on the bottom right, those are all cars I've raced in their respective class. The bottom left one is my car also, but I can't race it. It's not designed for race class requirements. So that's the distinction. As you get into this, you can use your own car if you want, or you can rent a car, which all of these other cars I rent actually. I could own one, but why own one when you can rent one and not suffer the damages? And believe me, you pay for insurance, but at least you save yourself the headache and the aggravation. So that's that's probably the most common question I get. The next question I get most frequently is, how fast do you go? And that's a tricky question because you saw the turns. Turns don't allow you to go very fast. Unless you've got a long straightaway between turns, you can't really go that fast. But this is how fast I've gone so far, 172 miles an hour. And I'll show you where in a little while. It's pretty fast, but you know, speed gets boring because speed, again, happens on a straight line. Nothing else happens on a straight line. You're typically not passing somebody. If you're passing somebody, there's a very limited risk, just going around them, versus turns where things happen, cars slide, and you know, carnage ensues, as we saw a little earlier. So next question I get the most is, what are my favorite tracks? The absolute favorite track I've got is Watkins Glen. It is a phenomenal track upstate New York. It's a very reputable racetrack. It was originally the F1 track in the country, started in 1947. It was eventually relocated outside the town. Originally, it was actually inside the city. You can imagine what could happen and what did happen, in fact. I'll show you what, and I mentioned earlier the 172 miles an hour. I apologize, the speeds that you see on the bottom, the 189, for example, those are kilometers. So just a frame of reference, 200 kilometers is 120 miles an hour. So you can sort of divide by 2 and get a sense of it if you're interested, but you'll see the screen kind of gets a little bit muddy after a while. But I'll just play that. I'll just do one lap. It'll be a couple of minutes. And I'll point out at one point where was that top speed that I ended up hitting. So we're going down to turn 1. I'm offline because I just passed somebody. The car slides a bit. Back up to full throttle. That's the green circle you see at the bottom. Now I want to go up the S's. This is where the beginning of the fast section. There's a lot of turns, but because you're going uphill, the car is essentially kept in good spot with the traction. You're going up, up, up. You're now, I don't know, I'm running about 250 kilometers, so figure probably about 140, 150 miles an hour at this point. Here's a bump. There's another bump. There's another bump with a little slide, and here's another bump, and a couple of bogeys in front of us, so we're going to try to take them out. You'll see one of them will try to block me. We'll take care of that. Just a second. And then we'll go after the next guy. So here's what he does. He's got the line. The guy in front always owns the line, and then he cuts back in to prevent me from passing. I'm going to go out to the right and pass him. Now I'm going to be offline again, which means I'm going to hard brake, but I'm going to then slide the car quite a bit. As you can see, I'm basically fighting 1.7 G is what the car is registering. Back to full throttle, on another straight, going uphill. There's about 100 feet of elevation change on that track, just so you understand. And now I'm going to make my biggest mistake of the day. I'm going to turn in too early. And there we go. I lose control. I have to counter steer and pick it back up. Happens all the time, but you get used to it. Now we're almost done with the lap. Basically, we'll be almost ready to pass this guy by the time we finish the lap. And this will be a full lap at the Watkins Glen. 2 more seconds and we are done. It's a very exciting track. I love this track. Can't imagine. There we go. We're about to take him out, but unfortunately the video stops right here. So that was a lap. Second favorite track is Sebring down in Florida. I mentioned it earlier. What you see on the upper left, this is a very typical setup when you're actually starting to get pretty high level tracking. But when you start, you don't need, this is a mechanics organization. They carry your car to the track, they support it. When you start, you actually drive your car to the track, you race it or drive it, and then you get off the track and you go back home. And hopefully nothing happens in between those two, so you can actually go back home with your car in one piece. Once the speeds start to pick up and you become more familiar with it and you gain a lot of confidence, you want to use these guys just because, A, they maintain the car, because you're going to start to go through tires and brakes, and you don't want to be yourself having to do all this. But the other thing is, something goes wrong, God forbid, They can help you get home. They can fix your car if it's pretty minor, and it saves you. You can actually fly down because Sebring is quite a bit of a haul. It's a good 17 hours if you're living in the Boston area. So second favorite track, I don't have any videos of it, but you know, if you're into cars, you can see a Viper ACR on the upper left, an antique Porsche in the middle, a couple of mono spots on the right-hand side with nice Golf livery. That's a very antique look. And then a little Ferrari on the bottom for viewing pleasure. Again, for people who are into cars, that is obviously a lot of fun. So the next question I get is, what do I like about driving on a racetrack? Now, interestingly enough, and I'll show this in a second, but most people think it's the speed. And you know, the speed, the exhilaration, the acceleration, the handling, these are all fun. But what I found really drew me to driving on a racetrack, whether I'm racing or just training, is it forces you to learn at just a different speed. And it reopens, you know, we spend the first 20, 25 years of our lives just learning. We're in school, we're learning, we get great at it. And then we flip the switch, we start to work, and work is using your knowledge. And we actually start to lose our ability to learn. And I'm a firm believer that all of us could learn 15 different languages in our 50s or 60s or whatever age we are. But it's just that we've sort of lost the art of learning. Driving on a racetrack will get you that back. I promise you that. Well, the discussion happened with one of my bosses in the prior life, and you know, he couldn't understand why I was thinking that driving made me a better manager, but it truly did. And this specific turn that I'm going to show you in a second is, and this is not the actual event, but there was one day I'm driving this track, doing about, and you'll see it, about 150 miles an hour, going into a turn. And there's a car to my right. In this case, there's a car to my left, but I'm going to pass him pretty quickly. And the debate in my head is instinct of survival on one hand, and the desire to prevail, i.e. to finish first, on the other hand. And the amount of thinking, processing that goes on at that moment is just staggering. And I said, you don't do that in normal life, but once you practice it on the street, on the road, obviously not the race, the racetrack, I mean, you get good at it, and it's just relearning all over again, and it's pretty phenomenal. So I'll just play it. It's just a few seconds. You'll get a sense. If you watch, the speed is up on the upper left. It is in miles per hour. We're going to hit close to 150. And then the hard brake is that red pedal. And then you're turning into a turn. The car, once you get there, and I'll stop it right here because there's nothing, well, then it's just a, you know, I keep on running, but could get boring for you guys. But what happens is the car actually, you're braking so hard, the car's rear end is moving around, and it takes all of your energy to manage that, to see where you're going, to make sure you don't lose control. Obviously, you don't get there from day one. You learn the process of driving that way, and it goes pretty quickly, actually. Some people do it in, you know, a couple of years. But it's that ability to learn that you kind of regain almost overnight by driving on the track. And that's really the number one thing. The other thing that happens when you're driving on the track, I mentioned earlier, you really need to be focused. You forget whatever it is that's bothering you. You will actually get on the racetrack, get off the racetrack, and you'll go home and feeling perfectly at peace, at ease. And it's just a function of how much you need to live in the moment to be able to execute whatever it is that you're trying to execute, whether you're trying to win a race or whether you're just trying to get better at driving properly. So those are really the things that I've taken out of my time on track. The next question, obviously, people say is, okay, well, so you're doing 150 miles an hour. You're saying the car is a little bit out of control, and you know your task is to regain control. What if you lose your concentration? Is it dangerous? What could happen? Oops, that wasn't the intent. it can be dangerous. And here's a very typical example of an accident that occurs. This was taken out of a real race, not me. And you'll see there wasn't that much danger in this actual incident, but it is a very common incident, very similar to the one we saw earlier. Boom, all the cars pile up. I mentioned earlier, if you're stuck in a group of cars, you know, you need to be able to see them. This guy was too close. Whoops, I didn't intend to go this quickly. The guy there could not see in front of him, and therefore when the cars started to pile, he couldn't stop. Well, why is it going on by itself? I don't know. I will come back here. So anyway, the point is, if you looked at the incident, a lot of expenses, obviously, the cars did get dinged, but no one was hurt in that incident, even though there were something like 15 cars hitting each other all at once. This one, individual driving clearly needs more training. And this is why you want to go to race school and get taught by people who've been trained, because this guy makes two mistakes. And we'll walk through this very quickly, but I'll just point out the simple mistakes that are so counterintuitive to someone who hasn't been trained to drive on the track. The first one is right here. He's turning in, and if I had the sound on, you'd start to hear his tires squeal. What's happening is he's just sliding a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. It happens all the time on a track. But he scares himself. So what does he do? What most people do if they're scared, they either hit the brakes or at least they relieve a little bit of the pressure on the throttle. That's what he does. And what happens? Well, that's no longer a good position. It's no longer a good position for two things. First of all, because he's obviously off axis. And secondly, because if you look down to the left, there's a right-hand turn coming up, and he's clearly going left at this point in time. Now, the two things he did was, when I first stopped it, and I'll just pull it back, right about here, he lifts his foot off the throttle. You can see the car is no longer aligned with the track. And if you move it a little forward, you'll see that it gets worse, progressively worse. And here it's starting to look pretty bad. So what should he have done? Well, if you ever find yourself in a situation where your car has a slight shift in position, actually apply some gas, because that will allow you to settle the rear end of the car. Driving a car on a racetrack is just balancing a car. You got to figure what grip you need where. His rear end is sliding, which means it's too light. If he applies a little throttle, and keep in mind, he is scared because the tires are squealing and it's telling him that he's losing grip. But if he accelerates a little bit, not a lot, but just a little bit, he will settle the rear end. He can steer back into the turn, get himself into a straight line, and then hit the brakes very, very hard. Because he misses that, then things go awful afterwards. Boom, 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 and we keep going like this. The other thing he could have done, actually very early on, would have been to counter steer sooner than he did. What happens is we all make mistakes all the time. The best drivers out there, the winners of all the races, they're just very, very quick at making corrections. This guy was very slow, and on top of that, he made a mistake by lifting the throttle. So two problems in this incident. That doesn't happen very often, to be honest, but maybe once a weekend when I go on the track, somebody does exactly what you're looking at. It is the most common thing. People get scared, lift their foot off the throttle, or worse yet, hit the brakes, and the car goes into a tailspin. And usually there's a wall coming right up. The last one I'll show you, this is a personal friend. So we're actually doing what's known as a lead follow exercise. We're not racing officially. I just let him go by. Normally I'd be driving about 110 miles an hour at this point on the track, and I've just backed off to about 75 miles an hour, let him go by. And what I want to do is I want to follow him to see what he does, either because I can learn from him or because I can teach him once we get off the track. So there's 3 cars, by the way, that are friendlies here. The guy in the silver Porsche here, this is the guy you saw in the first picture with me on the podium. This is Chris, and Chris has got a brand new GT3. It's 3-month-old at that point, and it's track right here in Massachusetts. By the way, the elevation change from, we're almost at the bottom of the track here, and the top, which is right up there in the trees, is about 190 feet. So there's a lot of movement. Well, my computer's got a mind of its own. Anyway, so I'm gonna let him go and you'll see what happens. So we start to follow each other. I'm now gonna accelerate to get behind him. And what I'm doing is I'm watching both of them. Now Pierre, my friend in the silver car, lets Chris go by. So that's fine. And the three of us are now regrouping. And so we can watch each other and learn from each other and eventually teach each other. So you're seeing basically what is normal driving on the racetrack with a group of people who are just not trying to compete against one another. The exception to this is the green Miata in front, where Chris is going to say, so Pierre just pointed me to say, go in behind Chris. And I'm going to control a little bit the viewing, because Chris has decided that he wants to pass Michael. Now, notice something. You're at the top of the hill, right? Like I said, we're about 200 feet above where we were earlier. And Chris is going to the left of Michael's car. Michael's the green and yellow Miata. And you can see the angle of the road, right? It's sloping upper on the left and down on the right. That's called positive camber. It means that when the car wants to slide left, it's actually encountering the road as a force, trying to lift it, if you will, and it's keeping you hugging the ground, and it's giving you very good traction. We'll keep going a little bit, and hopefully we can see it enough. Let me stop here. Notice how now on the left-hand side, you're either flat to maybe slightly declining. This is one of the first things you need to learn when you start to get on the racetrack, is reading the camber. Why? Because if the track starts to go left, and if you look at Chris's white car, it's actually a little bit more compressed on the left and on the right, but it's also starting to lean against the horizon to the left. And that's because the track is starting to move away into a negative camber. In other words, the track is moving from under his feet. And what happens then is, much like the car we just saw, his rear tires are going to go light. And in order for him to keep turning, he's going to have to slow the car down. The problem is he doesn't have any grip, which means he's going to have to do the thing that he, at this point in time, is concerned the most about. He's going to have to straighten the steering wheel. That's the only thing he can do, which means he's going to go in the grass. You can drive on the grass. It's just very slippery. But if you're going to go in a straight line, it's not a problem. Chris did not choose to go in the grass. And here's what happened. Boom, hits the wall, whoops, and flips the car upside down. I'll just move it back just so you can appreciate. Not because I want to scare anybody. This is where he impacts the wall, and this is where he flips in the air. This is the brand new car landing on the shiny side. Not a good thing for Chris. He was fine. He came out of there and he was fine. We were talking afterwards, but the car was complete write-off. Chris was at that point in time sort of what I would consider an intermediate driver. He should never have tried to pass Michael in a turn. And those are rules that we actually have in place. So the first thing you do when you get on the racetrack is they teach you about safety. And if you forget about those safety rules, remember I said your brain needs to be engaged. You need to be thinking about it. This was a moment where Chris, I think, lost his concentration. So I'm not trying to scare anybody, but it is a high-risk environment. You have to be respectful of the rules, respectful of the other players on the track, and stay concentrated, get your good night of sleep, and the list goes on. The stuff you know. So, is it dangerous? Well, I've never seen anybody hurt per se. I've seen people disappointed, but never anyone hurt, although I've heard of some people like breaking a leg or things like that. Again, safety is our number one concern. I've got 8 years and over 100 track days behind me. I've seen quite a few, not that many of those, but I've seen quite a few dents in cars, but I've never seen anybody hurt. So from a safety standpoint, I think we have a pretty good track record. But again, you don't want to do that to your car because it is your car. Although if you rent a car, then maybe you care a little less. Well, let me back up before I go there. So the question usually when I talk about these crashes is, do I get scared? I'll be perfectly honest, when I started, I used to get scared just about everywhere on a racetrack. If you're going 120 miles an hour, which, you know, if you put yourself on the highway and you're being asked, and your instructor will ask you to get close to the edge of that white line you see here, it gets very scary because you don't know if you're actually going to hit the line or overstep the bounds and get on the grass, which is not a good thing. Again, if you don't turn the steering wheel, if you don't try to brake hard, everything's gonna be fine, but it is very scary at first. Once you get used to driving triple digit, which doesn't take very long, once you get used to managing the weight of the car, transferring where you need balance, it all gets very easy and you're not scared anymore. Even my wife, 2 days of driving, and she was doing 120, she was looking to go faster. And believe me, she hates every time I do anything remotely above speed limit when I'm driving. So, you know, this is one of those things where you kind of scare yourself a little bit at first, but we always say when we teach, never make a mistake more than 1 mile an hour above your control level. And control level is where you're comfortable driving, because 1 mile an hour is very easy to back off. You lift a little bit of the throttle and you've shed a couple of miles an hour and the car's back in control. And that's, you know, how we all stay safe. Andrew asked me, so how do you know when you let up on the gas? And I thought about it, and you know, it's funny. Our cars, it doesn't matter. I don't care what car you drive. Our cars are driven way, way below their capabilities. And I've tested that with a lot of people on many occasions. So you usually, your survival instinct, what I was talking about earlier, when you're trying to win and you're trying to survive at the same time, your survival instinct is so much stronger that it will keep you well below the car's capabilities. That doesn't mean you can't do things that will cause a car to slide. But for the most part, braking is the least of my worries with any driver I instruct. We usually hit the brake way, way, way before we need to. So that's the easy part. What I was saying earlier about recognizing the track angle, how the road is paved, because pavement can change, right? You Sebring, you move from concrete to old pavement to new pavement. Some of it's bumpy, some of it's flat. You need to remember where these things happen so that you can control or anticipate the movement. But otherwise, you know, I've never seen anybody having problems with their braking. It's usually the turning or the smoothness with which they turn that's the problem. So the next question I get, and this is a common one from my students, is, okay, so where do we go from here? The first thing you would do if you got in with an instructor on a racetrack is in the classroom. They would actually sit down with you for a few hours and teach you the basics, the fundamentals. We've got all sorts of things that we can talk about, but mostly related to one thing, and it's all about balancing the car and finding the right line to be on. There is a theoretical area on the track you should be, depending on circumstances, your car and all that, but where you should be to maximize both speed and safety at the same time. There are plenty of places where you can go very fast, but it's not very safe. There's plenty of places where you can be very safe, but it's not very fast. So it's balancing the two, that's the trick. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. And then we go and discuss your objectives. I've had students who just cared about going fast. Those usually the students actually don't like, because they're not thinking about safety, and we need to drum that into their brains. But there are many people, all they want to do is get better at driving their own car, or they want to have some fun, or they want to experience something new. And those are very valid reasons. Once I understand as an instructor the needs and the objectives of the student, I'll build the whole training. We'll spend 2 or 3 days together, and I'll build the whole training. We'll have some sit-down sessions, we'll have some on-track sessions, and we'll have some download sessions after being on track. And it's all intended to bring you, you know, through the learning curriculum. There are plenty of books that talk about it, but until you put it into execution, it's just theory. And though that's essentially what learning how to drive on a racetrack is all about. And people ask me, so do you have any funny stories? There's plenty of funny stories. It all depends on your sense of humor, but I'll tell you one. In the early picture when I showed the garage, the car that was lower left, it's called an R8. It's the same car that we saw jumped up onto all the other cars in the race that had this big 15-car pileup. So I took this R8 to a track in Canada. Obviously, there's a trailer. My mechanic took the car there. It felt wonderful. They checked the car before. I get on the racetrack. I start to run a session. So they run in sessions. So you have a specific amount of time. It could be 20 minutes, could be 45 minutes, could be 3 hours. But you have dedicated time to practice. If it's just HPDE or high performance driving, then that's all you're going to do. If you're racing, then you practice for a while and then you race. So I get on the track. I've driven 8 hours to get to Tremblant, that track I mentioned. I get on the track, and after 23 minutes, my brakes are bust. They're brand new brakes. And this is 3 years ago. I didn't expect that. My mechanic didn't expect that. We weren't able to find another set of brakes, either in the US or Canada. And so my 5-day experience, 16 hours of driving to and from, turned into 23 minutes of track. I thought it was pretty funny. I didn't think it so at the time. My wife was there with the S3, the little Audi that was on the right. And so I did venture a little bit with it, but I didn't want to burn it because that was our ride home. But we kept that to a minimum. But these incidents happen. Now I always carry parts, or my mechanic always carry parts. And I make sure that I'm ready for any eventualities with tires, brakes, and anything that's consumable. The other question is, and I'll tell you the story with my wife. What happens on the first day? I can tell you this much. So the night before, my wife and I sat down, and she was petrified. She was like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. And so I was trying to understand. I know what she's going through because I've lived it, but I'm trying to understand her angle. And she is intimidated. She all of a sudden, she has a brand new Porsche. So she's, concerned she's going to damage it. She's concerned she's going to be with a bunch of, and I'll say it this way, guys with too much adrenaline and too much testosterone. And she's concerned about this, that, and the other. And so we talk about it, and I try to calm her down. And so the next morning, I've arranged to actually for one of the female instructors. There's actually quite a few women on track, not as many as guys yet, but the number has grown in the past 10 years quite substantially. Anyway, so she is petrified, and yet the next morning, she's put at ease through the discussion I just mentioned, and she realizes that everybody on the track with her is in the same experience level. They're all either newbies or they've had 1 or 2 track days, and so they're just learning their way around. Nobody's driving like a bat out of hell. Everybody's got an instructor in the car with them, make sure nothing bad happens, or at least limit the risk of it. And so she comes out of the first day with classroom and on-track instruction. She's delighted. She's not like, I got to go race again. But because that's what she says, right? She even bought a sticker after that says race car parking only, and she puts that where her car is. But by the next day, she's like, I want to do more of this. She's doing 120 miles an hour where I am showing right now, that called a front straight, but it's not really a straight, it's more like a banana. And she's like, how do I go faster? And it's technique, but she is definitely getting into it. So I think now she's a testament to how easy it is to try it, to adopt it or not, as you choose, and to get familiar with your car and to just restart the whole process of learning once you hit a time where maybe you're not learning as much. So what did I wish I knew before I got into this, right? And that's a common question I get from people who are usually already in the mix, but I thought I'd share it with you Because if you get into this, there are implications. I mentioned earlier, the time, the brain, the cash, and the car. Well, the cash specifically is thanks to our friend Einstein, who told us that basically energy is equated to the square of speed of light in his case, but speed nonetheless. And so the reason why I say the cost can escalate quite a bit, and you should be thoughtful about that, is that if you go an extra 10 miles an hour, you've now increased the energy needed to decelerate your car by a factor of 100, right? The square of 10. And up to a certain point, that doesn't matter because you're still within the speeds that you might drive on the street, or maybe a little bit above, but not that bad. But once you get pretty good at it, that equation starts to matter because you're starting to slide the car a lot. That's the way to go fast. There's something called the slip angle, which is the angle where your car is not quite in line with the road. That's because you're pushing the envelope. Is 3 to 4 degrees is the usual maximum rate of energy consumption, if you will, because you're basically burning your tires. And when you need to brake, you're burning your brakes and so on and so forth. And just to put it in context, and I don't want to scare anybody, but when I started, I guesstimated that my cost per month was about $2,000. That's what it would cost me to do, a 3-day weekend on the racetrack, the fuel, the track time, the insurance, everything. Today, if I race for 3 days, it's $50,000. So there is a bit of a gap between the two. You don't go from 2 to 50, but it does increase, and you don't realize it until it's too late. So be aware of that. It is an addictive sport. Everybody I've seen introduced to it will usually do it for a number of years just by intent. And so it is very addictive. It does take time. 2 to 3 days a month is not easy to find. At least it's not for me. And if you're talking about starting to drive tracks like Sebring or Watkins Glen, you're starting to have to fly there. So you waste another 2 days going to and from. So the time becomes a real significant. And in fact, it's my biggest worry today is how much time can I actually expend on spending time on the track. So I would recommend strongly, and I showed some names at the beginning, and I think this is going to be available online. Do some research, explore racing schools. Racing schools for $2,000-3,000, you can have a 2-3 day without your car, covered, insurance, fuel, tires, whatever. You go in, they give you a set of keys, an instructor, and you come out of there, and all you've spent is that $2,000 to $3,000, and you should be thankful because there was no risk or very minimal risk to you in any way, shape, or form. That's my strong advice. That I started at the racing school, but that was despite myself, and I didn't do any research and fell into the proverbial expenses without knowing. So that's what I would expect everybody should be doing on a normal plan, if you will.
So Alain, I thought maybe what you meant by that is that it's money times the speed of light squared, which would be a lot of money. So when you say you do 50,000 in a 3-day excursion, you obviously are doing a lot of repairing of brakes, I imagine, is right? Because you said you just to replace the brake pads on the GT3 might be what, $3,500 or something, or?
Yeah, it gets very expensive very quickly. I mean, I go through a set of tire in about an hour.
Oh wow!
And a set of tires is between $2,500 and $3,500 bucks. Mm-hmm. So do quick math. The insurance. Let me put it this way: if you're driving a street car, and it's costing you $1 to insure the car, a fictitious number, but just for example's sake, if you do high performance driving, your cost of insurance just gone up to $5. It's a different insurance, so you're still spending your $1 on street insurance, but you're now spending another $5 on track insurance. Mm-hmm. And if you go racing, that $5 becomes $20. Now, if you do quick math based on your own insurance rate, you'll see how quickly it adds up. Wow. For the same car. So everything grows exponentially. And that's what I meant by using Albert's little equation. But again, you don't get there from here, right? There are stepping stones. It's just if you're not, you should be thinking about it. What is it that I'm willing to spend on this? How much time am I willing to invest? Those are the two big ones. Your car, well, if you have a car, you can get on the track. Your brain, well, I'm assuming everybody has one. It's just you need to make sure you're rested, you're focused, you're thinking about that when you go, because otherwise nothing good is going to come out of it.
How do insurance companies evaluate your risks? Do they have a way of looking at how well trained you are on the track, or is it just all or none? It's a binary thing. Racetrack insurance is 5 times no matter what, or 20 times, whatever.
It's more of the latter, but of course, once you spend some time on the racetrack, they start to know you, and then they adjust accordingly. It's like street insurance. They don't know you. They know you're 5 years of experience, but the change is not that significant. But if you've had 2 car crashes, well, guess what? Your rate has gone through the roof. It's the same basic scenario.
Alain, can we do something? I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we go back to the one of your, maybe before the crash, you had a really good dashboard that showed all the different activities. Yeah. Can you describe to us how that works exactly? So there's a GForce thing. Is that something that you actually look at on the track as you're driving, or is that just
you mean my computer? Look, this.
Yeah, so that GForce thing on the right, what exactly, is that something you actually watch as you're driving, or is that for analysis later?
For analysis later. So that is actually captured on the computer, right? I've got a whole computer system in the car. Well, what it's doing is it's number of things. So their GForce is lateral, right? So how much you're turning, and forward and backwards, meaning how much you're accelerating or braking. Then it's also telling you whether you're oversteering or understeering, which means, are you sliding the car against the turn or overturning because you're sliding the rear end? Well, we saw the little black Audi oversteering earlier. It's showing you obviously your speed, your gear, your throttle, your brake, and this little squiggle with a little card, that's just whether you have traction control on or off. My strong advice, always keep it on. Pro racers will argue you should take it off. You really want to maximize the speed, and they're right. But we're talking pro racers here. It's not worth the risk of losing control of your car, endangering your health for the sake of gaining what, 1/10 of a second on your track time. It's just not worth it. If I was getting paid for racing, if I was getting paid millions for racing, absolutely, I'd take it off all the time.
All right. Tell me this, when you train people, can they also, one of the questions that came up in the chat room, do they also, are there simulation training tools out there like they have for flying aircraft? Can you actually simulate race car driving, and is that helpful?
There are. That's a good question. There's a couple of things. I've tried it, and you're gonna laugh, but it makes me nauseous. I get seasick because you don't have the motion, right? Yeah. You've got the track, but you don't have the motion, and I need the motion to. I've got a butt meter that's actually pretty good, and that's what keeps me alive. And once you remove that, and it's funny because the Porsche school is the one that tested that, and there were six of us racing. We're actually doing a race, but an I race, if you will. And there were 2 of us that had real track experience. The other 4 were novices, which is exactly your question. Like, it's a good way to learn. The 4 novices had no problems being on the simulators, and the 2 guys who had experience, one of them, the other guy actually just abandoned. I won all 3 races. I was running against people who had no experience, but I was sick for about 3 hours after.
Wow.
So yes, there are softwares. The best use I find, because I've raced against people who have trained on those simulators, is you learn the shape of the track. You don't learn the right angles necessarily. You don't learn the feel of the road, because asphalt can change. It's amazing how much some little patches, you get to see them. There's like a little square spot. And if you're doing 102 miles an hour at this place at Palmer, you can actually yank your steering wheel. Yank is not the right term. I apologize for that, but you can turn in more, even though if you did it 2 feet before or 2 feet after, you could not. It allows you to redirect the car. If you know that that's there, you can take that to your advantage. You don't have that on simulators. So there's a lot of gaps, but I think it's a very good way to familiarize yourself with the track before you actually get on the track. So you're not surprised that, oh my God, there's a turn. You
Yeah.
know?
By the way, were you going to show anything else, or can I take the screen over for a minute?
Let me see. Oh, well, I was just going to say one thing. So many people say, so what's next? Let me just stop this. This was just another lead follow with the same guy that he has a Viper ACR, pretty good car. So what's next for me? I have to make a big decision, and it's much the same as you might have. I need to decide whether I want to go full on racing, which is going to consume a lot of time, and I think I might have to retire to do that. But that's what the bottom picture is. It's full-time racing. Right now, I just do it, when I can. Or do I want to learn how to fly a plane? And I've actually
Oh my God, you know what? We did not rehearse this. We did not rehearse this, but that's exactly what I have happening in the month of September. I have a friend of mine that I knew at MIT that flies planes and teaches people how to fly them. Yeah. And he'll be on. His name is Phil Mandel. Now he's on the West Coast, so it might be difficult for you to get lessons from him directly, but I think you're going to love that show. Yeah. This has been great. I just want to share with you, if you could stop, I think I could just override the screen, but let me see. I want to share with you some final things that I just found myself, and I think this could be useful. So if folks want to type in, and I believe they even have for Watkins Glen and Sebring, I think you can actually type in, country, the name of the course and then track tips. And here's a case where they literally, and I don't know if you'll hear the sound, I think I'll keep it off, but they literally tell you, they actually point out and tell you what to do at each curb, what to look out for. They have all kinds of expressions about the apex of the curve and things like that. So you can kind of in a preliminary way, figure out what you should be prepared for. And then they also have, in some cases, I won't have the sound, but here's a case where they actually are narrating for you what you should be doing at this point in time. So if you're getting ready to go on a track, there are ways you can prepare yourself with these kinds of tips. And then finally, I wanted to show, and I've sent this into the chat room, AT, this is your site, which has a lot of your rides, which I enjoyed thoroughly watching. And so I think that would be a great way for people to just spend a little more time seeing your driving capabilities and the different tracks you've been on and the different cars you drove in the process. Is there anything you wanted to highlight before we wrap up?
No, these are done for instruction purposes. Some of them are a little older, so I've, maybe evolved a little bit since, but they're what we call clean laps, which means there's no other car, so you can drive the line. And the point is, when I'm trying to teach a line, your comment about the video, that's absolutely what I do. Before I get on the racetrack, a brand new racetrack, I'm going to be running Mid-Ohio in September. I've never been to Mid-Ohio. I just do that. I find somebody who is a reputable driver, and I just watch their line. And that's what these are. They're just, showing where the line is.
Excellent. Well, Alain, this has been a wonderful hour of your time. Thank you so much. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to love this, and it's going to be online. It's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on the Jenks Center site, and I'm sure people will love to keep going back and revisiting it. And I'm really thrilled that you want to learn how to fly, because that's totally lines up with our guest next month, who literally just told me yesterday in an email, yeah, I'd be glad to do it. So it's going to be great. And I just will never think of you quite the same way next time I run into you, AT. I mean, you really, this is a whole other world that you live in. And the fact that I love the way you talk about mindfulness, because most of the time when you hear people talking about mindfulness, it sounds like they're sitting in a room with their hands upside down and their eyes closed, and they're trying to be mindful of the world. But you're talking about mindfulness in a whole new sense, which is just an intense, in the moment, a true task of being in the moment, because you basically are on the edge of survival on the track. And it's a whole other phrase and meaning for mindfulness I never thought of before, but I'm sure it's quite engaging, and I can see how it could be incredibly restful afterwards, after you go through an experience like that, to just feel like you've completely let go and forgot all your troubles. I think, as you even said at one point, your dog could have died that morning, but you're on the track, and all you think about is that track, and then it can actually make you release you from all the pain in the world and all the tension and stress you may have in your life. And just, it sounds like a very, very successful way to knock off all of that. And of course, you have to be successful to do the kind of thing you do, because the expense is dramatic. But I'm encouraged by the fact that you can actually rent a car and not have to own one of these, and do what you call the performance driving end of it instead of the race car driving. I didn't even realize there were schools for that. That's quite exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you again. I really appreciate your contribution today and your precious time on this thing. And then you're putting together, you're probably one of the most, the best prepped speakers we've ever had in the last year. So
Yes.
I truly appreciate that. I'm going
Thank
to turn it back
you.
to Hillary we'll just kind of wrap things up.
Yes, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you too, Andrew, for doing this. Yeah, I just want to thank a few people at the Jenks Center. Philip, he's our director. Sue Clark is our transportation coordinator. We have Vicki Douglas, administrative secretary. Suzanne Norton, who's our social worker. Patty Santos, our senior clerk. Kathleen Schneller, who does all of our website and administrative coordinator. Colleen Wages, who's our registered nurse. Maria Rutnam, who's our new WSA manager, and Nick Asario, who's the facilities manager. They all participate in so many different ways to help us. So thank you. And thank you, AT, for being here this evening. We really appreciate that. And thank you to our audience. And we hope to see you again soon. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a good
Good
night.
night.
Bye.
Thank you.